How important is understanding EU261 to your role? So we have 4 responses there. John, I think we should just make a start. We're 1 minute past. We've got a number of people dialed in already. It is being recorded, so those that attend late can just go back and watch the start. So thank you everyone for joining. Just by way of introduction, my name is Dan Francis. I'm a client director at Amach, and I'll be hosting this webinar. Unfortunately, Kevin has been called away on other matters. I don't know if there's any of Kevin's fan base who have dialed into this, so apologies. I don't have an American accent, terribly British, but I'm hoping that my broadband is going to stand for this complete webinar. Fingers crossed. In terms of asking questions, please post anything into the chat. We have a moderator working behind the scenes. They will pass them on to John and myself. Either we'll answer them through the webinar or at the end, depending on sort of how those questions form. So in a moment, I'll introduce John Power. He's our Chief Product Officer, and he's going to be discussing the challenges airlines are seeing with the EU261 regulations, and I guess how Amach are addressing some of those concerns. And I think especially this week, quite apt, we've seen a number of cancellations at a major British airline due to an IT failure, which has caused a number of disruptions. In fact, the industry has seen actually a tripling of cancellations over the past 12 months. That's caused by a combination of air traffic control strikes, staff shortages, and of course, what happened this week, good old IT breaking down. So what this means for airlines is that EU261 regulation means financial penalties from regulatory bodies and direct compensation. But I guess more importantly, it's around customer dissatisfaction. So John, I want to hand over to you now. And how does Amach break down the challenge for airlines in this space?
Yeah, no problem. I think just to add to your point as well there, Dan, around disruption and the EU compliance framework, 40% of our conversations at WAF were all related to disruption management. So for those who aren't familiar with WAF, it's the World Aviation Festival. We were there in October. It was in Amsterdam. And as I said, nearly half of the conversations were all about this area, Dan. Okay, it was really strong. So today what we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about the 5 main challenges related to EU261, right? So for those who aren't too familiar with EU261, it's essentially a compliance and regulatory framework here in Europe that essentially gives compensation for disruption in flights to passengers. Okay, that's it at a high level. So the areas and those challenges related to EU261 that we're going to touch upon today are very much around those compliance, around the financial penalties, around the communications and coordination issues related to EU261, fallout from EU261 on customer trust and satisfaction. That's a huge one. And the effects on the operational staff. And then potentially, Dan, we're going to look at some of the competitive advantage and revenue protection that it can give to an airline.
So let's start off at the top then. Tell me about some of the compliance and financial issues.
Yeah, no problem. So if we look at the big issues here, it's around compensation, right? So and again, I'm not going to go reading from the actual compliance or the law itself, but to give you an idea, per passenger, if a flight is cancelled and we don't follow the right eligibility rules, an airline has to give between 250 and 600 quid per passenger back, right? Now that's based on flight distance. So smaller the flight distance, 250 euro. The longer the flight distance, 600 euro. And it is based on a set of eligibility rules associated to that. You know, a flight that's delayed more than 3 hours, or if it's cancelled 14 days before departure. It's the sort of stuff that we have for it. There's also the actual company or country fines that can be applied to an airline. So within Europe, France, Spain, Germany can also hit airlines for up to 70,000 euros. So not only are you paying the passenger, Dan, you're also being hit potentially by enforcement bodies within each of these countries themselves. To kind of put this in practical terms, Dan, if we look at a rough example, you mentioned some great stats at the start of this particular webinar. And let's take those May stats. May 24, there was approximately 5,500 calls or 5,500 flights cancelled in Europe. Take the average passenger load, 160 people. Taking the lower end of that compensation, 250 euro, multiplying that up, that's equivalent to about 220 million euros in penalties for 1 month alone, right? So this is absolutely paramount in relation to tight margins that airlines currently make today. If you're starting to take a bite of that apple out, all of a sudden it's going to really matter now.
So where does Amach see the potential EU261 roadmap?
Yeah, we decided to look at kind of two concepts around that EU261 roadmap. And the first one is above the wing, right? And that above the wing is very much those customer touch points, right, that I talked about. Passenger eligibility, right? Working out the rules around who's going to get that compensation. And then working out as well options, which is rerouting, rebooking, upgrading, downgrading. Like even when you look at downgrading from a first class seat, a passenger's entitled to 70% refund for that flight, as well as the compensation as well. So that's huge. So that's concept one, above the wing, all passenger touch points. Then you've got below the wing from our roadmap. And what this actually does is it talks a little bit about the ground operations, crew availability, flight prioritization, potentially some sort of time recuperation around that. And I'm going to use some examples later on in this webinar to kind of bring this to light. But interestingly, we have implemented a solution, which is RPA, robotic process automation, for these claims all around eligibility and compensation. And they had an entire manual team working on this particular airline. And it took about 3 weeks to process refunds and compensation. We got that in about 3 hours just using RPA. So this stuff is automatable.
So you mentioned RPA. Everyone's talking about AI at the moment. Is there an AI opportunity in these challenges?
Yeah, again, AI is a hot term at the moment. I think for me, Dan, AI is just another new tool, right? 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it was all about analytics. It was all about, proactive analytics, reactive analytics, forecasting. AI is just another tool, right? And probably the two main areas out of those challenges that I specifically see AI having an effect on, and examples as well that we've used with current customers, is around the complex communication and coordination, right? If you have a disruption, airlines need to be able to clearly communicate to passengers around those disruptions. And I don't mean reactive, I actually mean proactive, if possible, to improve those communications, right? Secondly, it's about customer trust and satisfaction. With all these repeated delays and inadequate responses to IROPs, customer trust and satisfaction has dropped a lot in relation to this. So if you've got dissatisfied customers, they're not necessarily willing to come back again. So they're the two main areas that I see AI having an effect on: communications and coordination, as well as trust and satisfaction. Now, you're probably asking, well, how, John, can this be done, right? So if you look at today's industry model for airlines, they consist broadly of 70% reactive interactions. Now, it's important that I just dwell on that word, reactive. So a passenger has to get in contact with the airline before anything is done. 25% is virtual assistance, and about 5% is only proactive. AI gives us the opportunity here to turn that on its head, right? And to have 70% of all interactions automation, with 50% of all those interactions being proactive. And again, you're going to say, how are you going to do that? So the big way, and we've worked with this with a current client, and it's through an AI containment strategy. And what I mean by that is that a containment strategy focuses on using AI and automation specifically to handle customer queries and reduce the load on human agents to improve that customer improvement or customer satisfaction. Containment in this context refers to the ability of an AI system to resolve the customer issue without having to go to the human, okay, in the first place, okay? There's two real examples that spring to mind here. And if we talk about how we can look at that communication and coordination, right? We have implemented knowledge assist and chatbots from a chat and voice side of things that will allow us to have proactive answers ready to go for customers. So if we know there's going to be disruption in a particular airline, we will reach out to the customer to say this particular flight or connecting flight is delayed, right? You'd be surprised again in WAF how many airlines just want to have that basic comms in place to be able to proactively communicate with the passenger to say it's going to be delayed. AI can help with that, as I said, either through automated self-service, through voice or chat bots that allow that information to be shared directly out with the passengers themselves. Okay. Another one then as well is around RPA. So can the flight gets cancelled, right? And I talked about this earlier where excuse me, where if it gets cancelled, we can do the refund or compensation in real time. Okay. And this really makes customers happy because if they know they've been disrupted, they'll not have to argue or send in a complaint to turn and say, I'd like to get my money back within real time. And as I said, we do this within 3 hours of a flight getting cancelled to turn around and say that money is back in your bank account again. So you have the AI, chatbots, voice bots, self-service automation supporting communication and coordination. And you've got AI, RPA, supporting any flights that do get cancelled to be able to get refunds back into a customer to improve that customer satisfaction, okay? So they're the two areas that I see AI that we've practically worked on in Amach to be able to help with the challenges of EU261.
That's really, really interesting. So we talked, I guess, kind of about the passenger side. What about the operational side of an airline? I guess, particularly around operational staff. How does EU261 and IROPs affect them?
Yeah. Again, this falls into that below the wing use cases that we talked about already. And IROPs obviously has disadvantages for the passengers, but it also strains airline resources, right, including ground crew, customer staff, and pilots, right? And to be honest, it leads to burnout. Okay, that's the big issue here. A couple of specific use cases that we're working on with a customer, and we're looking into and this is a really interesting one. I'm putting together material on this now at the moment, and it's synchronizing cleaning crew schedules with catering operations, particularly on very tight turnarounds, right? So this below the wing use case would be around, well, if a flight has been delayed, how do we ensure that flights that need to be prioritized actually get the ground crew to clean the plane, right? And the catering management to ensure that food that might go off gets prioritized to a specific plane. So you've got a long haul flight coming in, you got a short haul flight coming in, right? They've both been delayed. Which plane do you prioritize? Our below the wing solution for this will turn around and prioritize the long haul flight, right? And remember the use case, cleaning crews as well as catering. Is that long haul flight has somebody's been sitting on it for 6 hours. There's 200 people on it. So we get the catering crew to prioritize the long haul flight first, along with catering management to be able to get that flight turned around faster. And then secondly, you move on to the short haul flight. Okay, so there are two use cases that I think are very apt at the moment. And certain airlines as well, Dan, want to trial this sort of example with non-core services first before they move into core services, right? And other core services that I'm not probably going to dwell on too much here, Dan, could be the likes of emergency messaging to a pilot. Okay, and that's below the wing for disruption again. And a kind of a lesser emergency would be 10 planes sitting on the runway waiting to take off. One's been sitting there for 2 hours, one's been sitting there for 20 minutes. You're obviously going to prioritize the one that's been sitting there for 2 hours and having that emergency messaging going to the pilot saying, go, you're on the next slot, instead of having to wait. There's other emergency comms as well that can be based around, unscheduled ATC strikes, or where specific airspace has been closed off, right? And the pilot needs to know about that as well. So that kind of gives a view really of that operational staff effects of EU261.
Yeah. So I guess we've talked compliance, financial penalties, I guess customer communication and coordination, trust and satisfaction, operational staff management. Anything else we should be talking about?
Yeah, I think that there's the obvious one too, and compliance is one thing to EU261, Dan. You know, we can talk all day about that and making sure that we've got reports and transparency in place to make sure that we comply with it. But there is a competitive advantage for airlines here to be able to be compliant to this. You know, if they are compliant to EU261, it gives them competitive advantage because they're proactively giving customer care, right? Which gives them ideally higher CSAT scores or NPSs, right? So that's bog standard. And you'd be surprised how many airlines out there today don't even have the basics in place. They're still doing this stuff manually, right? So their CSAT scores get affected to this. And we have some direct correlations with some of our customers in relation to that refund automation that we have and CSAT scores going up. The second one is then around penalty avoidance, okay? And this is again back to those very, very tight margins that airlines have today, is that you don't want to be opened up to any sort of enforcement or government enforcement investigations that could incur more penalties. So as I said, you're not just paying that €250 associated to the passenger compensation, you could be paying up to 70,000. And there is a repeat fine. So in Germany, for instance, Dan, if you continually repeat those fines go up and up and up and up. So it's a constant penalty for repeat fines in Germany. So it's that cost avoidance or penalty avoidance as well, which is key as well in relation to the competitive advantage as well as cost avoidance.
So where should people start then, if they haven't already? I'm guessing most people have made an attempt to start in this. Where's the best place to start?
Yeah, and again, I'm working with a customer at the moment, and they've asked the exact same thing, Dan, right? Where do we start, right? And what we provide is an audit service that will go in and audit how much of the roadmap have you covered for EU261. And we'll identify the gaps, right? And that can be just a report handed back to Turner and say, here are those gaps, right? So you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you'll be compliant for it. So it's generally an assessment. Now we have a kind of a consultation activities in here that do that assessment to turn around and say, are you compliant? Are you not compliant? Okay. And if you're not compliant, here are the gaps, and here's how we would suggest you do that. I think a lot of people think they're compliant once they actually have a set of basic rules that can give compensation, but that's not the case. So the end game, so the start is an audit in relation to the assessment for EU261 compliancy. The end game is dashboard reporting that can turn around and show the likes of the number of claims, the number of passengers, the number of delayed flights. And this information can feed into multiple systems as well. And again, some real examples here of some of the advantages of complying and in implementing EU261 within airlines are loyalty programs. Okay, Delta recently in the States, they had a big outage, CrowdStrike, okay? And what they decided to do was for all their loyalty program members, they gave them 10,000 extra miles, right? So not only had they given compensation where applicable, right? They also turned around and said, for our loyalty customers, we're going to give you 10,000 miles. So this isn't just about satisfying the customer in relation to compensations. It's going above and beyond for your VIPs.
I think that's one of the things that I'm sort of taking away from this particular topic, that yes, there's the regulatory side of things which you have to adhere to, law. But I think more importantly, it's the impact it has on the customers and how they feel that the airline has reacted to the issue. And I think that's going to where airlines can probably do a little bit better to serve their customers more.
It's a great point, and this is back to that framework I talked about earlier, how today traditionally airlines are mostly reactive, right? If we can get to a place where they're proactive with a level of automation in there, you're flipping that on its head straight away, right? And we're talking about EU261 here today. This could potentially be very relevant to lots of different areas, and I'm talking airline call centers, right, is another one in relation to that. There's some stuff that we're trialing too as well around this whole concept of knowing customer behaviors for, let's say, empty baskets on checkouts, right? When you're going to buy a flight and for whatever reason you didn't buy the flight, okay? The call center is automatically informed of this particular left basket through a customer ID. So when the customer rings through, they're going to say, Mrs. Murphy, I see you left your basket unchecked out. What was the problem? That automatically brings down the temperature of the passenger straight away, because the call center agent knows that there was a problem. But that's for another day's conversation, Dan.
I can say that sounds like a topic of a future webinar.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I guess
go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
I think we've covered off most of the topics we were going to talk about today. I guess I want to sort of throw this out to the audience to see if there's any questions people want to ask. Nothing's been asked in the chat so far. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in there.
I think there's a few coming through here.
Here we go.
Yeah, there's a few coming through here. So one, yeah.
Well, I'll read that out there. Does the airline must be clear on saying the reason of the cancellation? Is it mandatory? How do the airlines manage this information with two objectives? Honest, but at the same time careful what is being sent to the passenger.
Yeah, so they do. There is strict rules around why compensation has to be given. Okay, so if I give you an exact example here, if a flight is delayed more than 3 hours, okay, that's one. The second one is if a flight is cancelled less than 14 days before departure. And another one then is if the passenger is denied boarding due to overbooking, Dan. Okay, so the rules are very tight in relation to this. So, and this is where this eligibility functions need to kick in. So when you're automating processes like these are essentially rules that you look up for John Power or for Dan Francis to say, are they eligible to get compensation? Well, Dan Francis is, because he was denied boarding due to overbooking. So yes is the answer in relation to a reason being given.
Thanks for that. Have Amach got some examples of working on AI-powered chatbots and automated updates, also streamline passenger communications?
Yeah, great question. So we have a couple of different scenarios in this one, and I'll give an example where we have knowledge assist AI, and what I mean by that is that we're obviously an AWS partner, and we use AWS components, but we have two customers that have deployed these particular solutions, and what they're actually doing is they are taking knowledge bases and knowledge information centers within these airlines, and they are gathering and aggregating that data. And then when a call comes into the call center, the AI is listening to the call, working out what the call and context is actually asking for, going back into the knowledge base within about 4 or 5 seconds, retrieving the answer or proposed set of answers associated to the question being asked by the passenger, so the actual agent can automatically give a response. So we did a PLC there a while ago where this was a great question, because it was hard. It was, how do I transfer zoological animals on this particular airline? Okay,
It's an
so
interesting use case.
yeah, so previously, you know, a hand would have gone up, the supervisor would have came over, that supervisor didn't know and had to talk to another supervisor that was there 15 years that might know, and all of a sudden the call's 45 minutes. In some of the proof of concepts we've done, we've got that down to about 35 seconds. And what it's done, what it actually did was pull back the process for transporting zoological animals on this particular plane. And it had the form and everything. That was answered in 45 seconds. So generally, most call centers have a cost per call, an average handling time, cost per call. Can you imagine taking 90% of that AHT down with knowledge assist AI? Okay, so that's one example, right? Another example is your bog standard chatbot in the front of the website, where you log on and you ask a specific question about either the booking of a flight and just empowering the passenger to have that information back. So that's a kind of a basic one, right?
Yep.
But as I said, the knowledge assist one is very, very powerful. Now, all of a sudden, if you start to give that directly out to the customer and they're actually asking that through a chatbot instead of ringing into the agent, you're going further. Now, I want to caveat that too, is because you need to train the model. Okay.
Oh, 100%.
This is not a silver bullet, Dan, at all. So again, there's other scenarios here where it might take 6 to 9 months to train an AI. And once it's trained, it will be able to answer those questions forever. Okay, so you need to train it.
Yeah, I know from my own clients who are doing work in this space, they've implemented AI, and yeah, it's really helped the agents. And the customer satisfaction stats prove that as well. Which guess kind of links to one of the questions that's been asked around, you mentioned improved CSATs from work in the past. Can you give any further details or information?
Yeah, so well, the AI knowledge assist was one, an improvement in CSAT scores there. The EU261 directly in relation to compensation and refunds, there was a direct correlation of decreasing time to be able to process a refund with CSAT improvement. Okay. Also as well, I'm giving very, very focused use cases here. If you look at a containment strategy, an AI containment strategy, and you want to measure a set of KPIs, CSAT being one, I don't know, average handling time being another. As you deploy your AI containment strategy, what you should start to see is the usage of automation and AI climbing, and a correlation of CSAT and AHT climbing also. If you don't, there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
But it's really, and it's a great question, that one in relation to the CSAT scores. I always ask a customer, what's your definition of success, right? And they say, my definition of success is working AI. I'm like, forget about AI. Tell me the KPI that you want. And they'll say, I want CSAT. I want improved FCR, first call resolution. I want improved cost optimization for cleaning crews, right? It's all about starting at the why. Tell me the why you want it.
Yep. I've got another question come through. How do airlines deal with passengers assigning their rights to multiple claim agencies at the same time? In such cases, an airline may receive multiple claims regarding the same passenger. Do we think automation can help with pre-screening such duplicate claims?
Yeah, this is another great question. And I understand where this question is coming from, because and I hope I'm interpreting this correctly, right? Is that you may actually have multiple profiles for customers, okay, in an airline, right? And this is a real challenge. Some airlines that we're working with are now beginning to unify customer profiles. So in this particular scenario, you may have John Power, and I've got several email addresses. Previously, that would have been seen as several people instead of just me, right? There are exercises, and this is, we're going off piece here a bit, but there are exercises in what's called data-centric airlining that look to unify that profile under one, right? And there is AI tooling to support that activity, to be able to essentially cleanse that data, right? And turn it into one unified profile, okay? And that's the long way of answering that question. But what is the short way of answering that question? What you can do is, if you do have multiple claims, this does not follow the standard process for refunds. It needs to get thrown out into an edge case for fraud analysis. Okay? And there's no other way of working that unless you got your unified profile. Okay? So in this particular scenario, and I hope, as I said, I'm interpreting the question correctly, is that you've got multiple requests, same person, and they're trying to get multiple claims from this. If that is the case, the rule-based eligibility functionality would throw that out as an edge case to be investigated for fraud, right? So it may not be a black and white standard happy use case where it'll get processed within 3 hours. It will need to be thrown out to a Tiger team that will look at it and kind of say, this is the same person. They're only allowed one claim on this. Or it's one person trying to, whatever, 5 or 6 different times, and they're trying to do some funny business.
Thanks for that, John. I think that's it for the questions, unless anyone wants to post any last minute things in the chat.
I'll give you a minute or two.
Yeah, I'll let you know the results of the polls. So have you started integrating AI? 40% said yes, 55% said no, but we're starting to explore the options. And then a small proportion said no, I don't believe we started at all. So I think these days, most people
and just like this, I get a lot of reports sent in here on Amach, and some of the bigger stats in there are talking about CTOs within airlines, and one stat in particular jumped out at me, that 72% of airlines CTOs are looking at investing in AI in the last half of this year, in other words, from June to December 24 and into 25. So the direction of travel in this particular area is strong, and there's probably real budget going to be thrown at this. I think every single airline, though, needs to think about, how do we adopt it in a non-core way to trial it?
Yep.
And then once you've got that working successfully, potentially use it for other use cases.
And of course, the holy grail of AI in airline is how to optimize fuel.
Yes, yeah, that's a completely other webinar, Dan, in its own right.
I think if I had the answer to that, I would be sitting on a beach somewhere.
I think there's another one coming in there.
Yeah, so you talked about getting started on reviewing when an airline is where an airline is on handling EU261. What are the most common areas you have seen the airlines tackle? Okay,
so again, I'm going to refer back to something I'm working on at the moment. If you look at the roadmap for EU261, there is the bog standard stuff of eligibility checks, compensation checks, and rebooking. Okay, they're the 3 basics that the airlines are tackling. Okay, the ones that they're not tackling at the moment, and by the way, some of them haven't even started down that road of automation. It's all being done manually. And the big areas that some of those more mature airlines are now beginning to look at are rerouting, hotel booking as well. Okay, hotel bookings can be particularly complex depending on whether or not the airline may actually have a loyalty program with an airline, with a hotel chain. Therefore, they might be able to get access to the APIs. But the basics are just around compensation, refunds, and eligibility rules, whereas the advanced EU261 stuff is all around, you know, those next stages of rerouting or hotel booking.
Okay.
Yeah. Another question there. Yeah, I can show that. As I think a question's come in there asking me about a demo. So let me just pull up that. We do have some stuff here. Just put this over here. I'm going to share this, but can you see that, Dan?
I can see it. Yep.
Okay, so this essentially is our demo environment for presenting some of the solutions that we have, and we've got 5 main areas really of solution categories: connected experience, customer service, optimize core services, optimizing IT, retail, and personalization. To give you an idea of some of the dashboards that we use today for EU261, it's very much under the likes of automated IROPs, is what we call it internally. And you've got your disruption handling here as a mainframe. And this talks a little bit about tax refunds, card refunds, voucher refunds, special meals as well in relation to compensation claims for this. Now, this is all dummied data. This is not customer data. Okay, it's a stubbed environment. An interesting one that I showed to a customer the other day was this middle frame here, contained cases by RPA bots. So this person zoned in straight away on this because they wanted to see the workload of RPA bots processing claims versus humans. And that's that last widget down here. So it's bots versus agent, okay? And you can see the bots here is obviously going to be higher than the agents. But again, this is something a customer wanted to see. Refunds. So if we click on refunds, you can talk a little bit around how refunds got resolved, right? So in other words, when tickets are opened or claims are opened for these, how many are opened, how many are not eligible. And I think we talked a little bit about that earlier, Dan, around potentially 5 or 6 different people coming through, and refunds issued. Total refunds down the bottom, compensation claims. Okay, compensation claims, number of claims in the middle, total payouts for delays and cancellations down the bottom, and then net promotional score on the right-hand side. I know we were talking about CSAT, but you got net promotional score as well, which can be a representative KPI for it. We talked a little bit about active claims as well. And again, these particular widgets and frames here talk about the average lead versus target time for these claims. They talk about claims by route, which is really important. Again, a lot of customers have been asking us around claims by route to be able to identify root cause analysis for why disruption actually happened. And then we got a little bit around flight rebooking. Okay, and the flight rebooking gives you a trend analysis over those alternative options for passengers, by the way, Dan, right? If they want to rebook, you can see the sort of trend analysis here in the middle widget, and then time taken for rebooking versus passenger notifications. Okay, and again, the customer wanted to see this one here on the right hand side, rebookings handled versus bots versus agents. And again, they wanted to just see the workload associated to automation versus a human working on this sort of stuff. Any questions, Dan?
No, it looks really interesting stuff.
Okay.
I think that's all from the audience as well with regards to questions. So I just want to say thank you, John. Been really informative. Certainly taught me a few things. So I just want to say thanks. And this is the last webinar of 2024 for Amach. And we'll be publishing the 2025 schedule hopefully fairly soon.
Great.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.